In a town where silence has kept the powerful safe for generations, two corrupt cops thought they could humiliate and destroy a young black woman without consequences. They thought she was just another name they could erase. But they had no idea who she really was or the storm she was about to unleash. What starts as a cruel setup turns into a fight for survival, a battle for justice, and a reckoning no one in Ashford Springs will ever forget. Stay tuned because you won't believe the twists, the betrayals, and the unstoppable courage that turned a whole town upside down. Drop a comment below, tell us where you're watching from, and be part of the story. Ashford Springs didn't have a sign warning you to turn back. It didn't need one. You could feel it the second you crossed the faded city limits. The weight, the way the air seemed thicker, the way the cracked sidewalks seemed to hold their breath when you drove past. I knew it before I even unpacked a single box. This wasn't a place where newcomers were welcomed with open arms, especially not someone like me. I pulled into the dusty driveway of the little rental house on Sycamore Street, the engine of my old SUV rattling like a dying breath. It wasn't much a sagging porch, peeling paint, weeds trying to choke the life out of the front steps, but it was mine, at least for now. I sat there for a minute, hands gripping the steering wheel, feeling every pair of unseen eyes in the neighborhood press against my skin. They were watching, behind curtains, through cracked blinds, a young black woman, alone, in Ashford Springs. That was all the reason they needed to pay attention. I forced myself out of the car, lifting the first box from the back seat. It wasn't heavy, but it felt like it carried the whole weight of the task ahead of me. Start small. Blend in. Listen. Gather. Expose. I hadn't come here to play house. I had a job to do, and it was bigger than my fear. The sun beat down hard as I worked. Sweat clung to my skin. A sheriff's cruiser idled slow past the house, the deputy inside giving me a long, unblinking stare. I nodded politely. He didn't nod back. By the time the U-Haul was empty, I was soaked through and bone-tired, but I didn't stop. I unpacked, set up the little kitchen, took a cold shower, sat on the creaky old couch, and listened to the stillness outside. Ashford Springs was quiet in the way a hunting cat is quiet, still, but ready to pounce. The next morning, I walked into town, wanting to get a feel for the place. The diner was the obvious choice, every small town has one, and it's where you find out what's really going on. I stepped through the door and immediately felt the shift. Conversations paused. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Eyes, curious and cold, slid toward me like knives. I kept my head high, walked to an empty booth by the window, and sat down like I had every right to be there. The waitress, a tired-looking woman with wiry gray hair pulled into a bun, hesitated before approaching. Her smile was brittle, more habit than welcome. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please." "Black," I said, offering a polite smile. She poured the cup a little too full, spilling a few drops on the table without wiping them up, and hurried away. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug and watched the room through the reflection in the window. A group of older white men sat at the corner booth, all wearing sheriff department jackets, talking low among themselves. One of them, a broad man with a thick mustache and a gut that strained his buttons, kept cutting his eyes toward me. I could practically hear the questions running through their heads. Who is she? What's she doing here? Trouble, they'd already decided. They just didn't know how much yet. After a few minutes, conversations picked up again, but not at full volume. Every laugh, every scrape of a fork felt a little forced. I drank my coffee, ate a dry piece of toast, and left a generous tip before heading back out into the heat. The grocery store wasn't any better. An old woman pushed her cart around me like I might bite. A teenage boy in a camo hat muttered something under his breath as he passed. I didn't catch it. I didn't need to. Back at the house, I found a note tucked under my front door. 3 words, scrawled in thick black marker. Don't stay long. No signature. No explanation. Like they thought the message needed one. I crumpled the paper and tossed it into the trash. Fear prickled at the back of my neck, but I shoved it down. I had been afraid before. Fear was familiar. Fear didn't get a seat at my table anymore. That night, as I sat on the front porch sipping weak tea, the cruiser came by again. Same deputy. Same stare. Only this time, he slowed down even more. His window rolled halfway down. "Nice night," he called, voice flat and humorless. I nodded. Sure is. He didn't move on. Just sat there, engine grumbling low, like a growl waiting for permission to bite. "You just passing through?" he asked finally. "No, sir," I said, keeping my tone friendly, planning to stay a while. A muscle ticked in his jaw. He didn't like that answer. "You'll find folks around here like things the way they are," he said. I smiled. "I'm just here to help." The words hung heavy between us. Finally, he gave the engine a little rev and pulled away, tires spitting dust behind him. I sat there a while longer, watching the darkness settle over Ashford Springs, feeling the weight of what was coming pressed down on my shoulders. They didn't know me yet. They didn't know what I'd seen, what I'd survived, what I carried inside, but they would, soon enough. And when that time came, it wouldn't be me who was afraid. By the second day, it was clear Ashford Springs wasn't going to pretend anymore. Whatever small-town politeness might have been left, it vanished like mist under the morning sun. They didn't bother with smiles or whispers now. They wanted me to see the lines being drawn, wanted me to know exactly where I stood. The first real sign came early, just after I stepped outside with a bag of trash. Sitting there, tucked carefully under the windshield wiper of my SUV, was another note. This time, it wasn't handwritten. It was typed, clean and neat, almost professional. "Leave now before it's too late." No fingerprints. No signature. Just a quiet threat, printed in black and white. I scanned the street. Curtains twitched. A shadow shifted on a porch across the way. Nobody came forward. Nobody said a word. They didn't need to. Their silence said, "Enough." I crumpled the paper, tossed it into the trash bag, and kept moving. No reaction. That was the rule. You don't feed the sharks. Later that afternoon, I drove into town, needing a few supplies. The hardware store was run by a man with a belly, the size of a beer keg, and a voice rough enough to scrape paint. He barely grunted when I asked for a deadbolt and a new set of window locks. "You fixing something already?" he asked, eyes flicking to the old SUV I pulled up in. "Just like to feel safe," I said evenly. He let out a snort, a sound somewhere between amusement and disdain. "Nothing to worry about around here. Long as you mind your business." The message was clear. I paid cash and left without another word. As I stepped back out onto the cracked sidewalk, I caught a flash of movement in the corner of my eye. Across the street, parked just far enough away to pretend it wasn't deliberate, sat a black pickup truck, 2 white men inside, baseball caps pulled low, sunglasses hiding their eyes, but I could feel their gaze all the way across the road. Watching? Measuring? I didn't look directly at them, just got into my car, locked the doors, and pulled out slow and steady. The truck followed at a distance. They didn't try to hide it. I drove back toward the house, taking a few random turns to be sure. Every time I checked the mirror, they were there, not rushing, not chasing, just there, a shadow glued to my bumper. Finally, I pulled into my driveway. The truck kept rolling, slow and steady down the street, disappearing around the corner. But the message was clear: you're never alone. That night, I didn't bother turning on many lights. I sat on the floor in the front room, back against the wall, sipping cold tea and listening to every creak and groan the old house made. Outside, the cicadas screamed, and somewhere far off, a dog barked once, then fell silent. The tension wound tighter and tighter around my chest, but I forced myself to breathe slow, steady. They wanted me to be scared, wanted me to pack up and leave in the dead of night like so many before me had probably done. I wasn't going anywhere, not until the job was done. The next morning brought another escalation. As I stepped outside to check the mailbox, I found something new waiting for me on the porch. A dead crow, its wings twisted at unnatural angles, its black eyes glassy and unseeing. Pinned to its chest was another note: "This is your only warning." I stared at it for a long moment, feeling a cold anger settle into my bones. They thought fear would break me, thought cruelty would send me running. They didn't know me. I grabbed a shovel from the side of the house, scooped up the bird without ceremony, and dumped it into the trash. Then I washed my hands twice, scrubbing hard even though the skin had already started to burn from how tight I was holding the handle. Around noon, the sheriff's cruiser came back. Same deputy as before. This time, he didn't bother driving past. He parked at the curb, engine idling, windows rolled down just enough for me to hear the low thump of country music drifting from inside. I pretended not to notice him. I raked the small patch of dirt that passed for my front yard. I swept the porch. I checked the locks on the doors and windows again. Through it all, he sat there, watching, waiting. Finally, after nearly an hour, he pulled away, but not before tipping an imaginary hat at me in mocking salute. The message was getting louder. "Leave. Go back to wherever you came from." But every time they tried to scare me, they only made my roots dig deeper into the ground beneath my feet. I spent the evening walking the perimeter of the property, noting the weak spots: the old latch on the back fence, the window facing the alley that didn't quite lock right. I made a list. I made a plan. Fear wasn't going to save me. Preparation would. Later that night, after the town had settled into that uneasy, oppressive silence, I stood in the dark living room staring out at the street. And that's when I saw it. A second cruiser, different deputy, different car. But the same game. They weren't going to stop. I realized, standing there in the dark, that they weren't just trying to scare me anymore. They were setting the stage. Something was coming. Something worse than notes and dead animals and cold stares. And when it came, I needed to be ready, because the first rule about being hunted is simple. You never wait for the predator to strike first. You strike before they get the chance. And if Ashford Springs thought it could break me, it was about to learn a lesson it would never forget. By the third day, Ashford Springs decided it was done sending messages. They wanted to look me dead in the eye. Now, wanted to make sure I knew the storm was coming, and it had a badge pinned right over its heart. It started just after noon, when a sheriff's cruiser pulled into my driveway without warning. Dust kicked up in thick plumes as the tires ground against the gravel. The same deputy from before stepped out, one hand resting casually near his holster, the other adjusting his belt, like he was settling in for a long, ugly conversation. I stood on the porch, arms crossed, chin high. "Miss," he called out, voice syrupy but sharp around the edges, "Sheriff Daniels would like to have a word with you." Not a question. An order wrapped in fake courtesy. I didn't move. "And if I decline," he smiled, slow and patient like a man used to getting his way, "wouldn't recommend it." I weighed my options. Public refusal could escalate things faster than I wanted. Better to see what Daniels thought he could intimidate me into doing. Better to make him underestimate me face to face. I grabbed my keys, locked the door behind me, and walked past the deputy without another word. The cruiser smelled like old coffee and cigarettes. A thin layer of dust coated the dashboard. The radio crackled softly, but no one reached to turn it down. We rode in silence through the narrow streets, past sagging houses and boarded-up stores, past kids playing barefoot in dusty yards who stopped and stared as we drove by. Sheriff's Station wasn't much, just a squat brick building with peeling paint and an American flag hanging limp on a rusted pole out front. The deputy led me inside without ceremony, the heavy door slamming shut behind us like a prison gate. Daniels was waiting. He leaned against the front desk, arms folded, boots scuffed and dusty, a smirk playing on his weathered face. Late 50s, early 60s maybe, broad shoulders, softened by age but still carrying the posture of a man who thought he owned the world around him. "Miss Ellis," he said, his voice low and oily. "Welcome to Ashford Springs." I didn't bother correcting him that I'd already been here a few days. Let him play his little game. He pushed off the desk and circled me slowly, like a man inspecting a problem he wasn't sure how to solve yet. "Folks been noticing you," he said, "asking questions, poking your nose where it don't belong." I stayed silent. Let him fill the air with his own words. "Now, I get it," he continued, hands gesturing like he was talking to a child. "New place, curiosity and all that. But see, around here, we like things simple, quiet." He stopped in front of me, close enough that I could smell the cheap aftershave clinging to his collar, and people who can't respect that. Well, sometimes they find Ashford Springs isn't as friendly as it looks on the outside. There it was, the threat. Coated in southern charm but sharp enough to draw blood if you weren't paying attention. I smiled, small and tight. "I appreciate the hospitality," I said evenly. Daniels chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "You're a smart one," he said. "I like that. Makes things easier." He nodded toward the door, signaling the meeting was over. For now, I didn't turn my back until he did first. That's the thing about men like Daniels. They read weakness like wolves read blood. You give them an inch, they'll take your throat. Back in the cruiser, the deputy said nothing. He didn't need to. His hands tightening on the wheel told me everything I needed to know. They didn't want me here, and they weren't going to play subtle much longer. When I got home, there was something new waiting. Spray painted across the garage door in thick red letters. Last chance. No subtlety now. No coded warnings. The whole town could see it. Neighbors peeking out from behind curtains, pretending not to stare. No one came over. No one offered help. Just eyes. Just silence. I scrubbed the paint off myself, hands raw and trembling, but not from fear. From rage. I didn't come here blind. I knew the cost of the work I'd signed up for, but standing there, paint fumes stinging my nose, I understood something even deeper. This wasn't just about me anymore. Ashford Springs had gotten used to its silence, built its peace on the broken backs of the people too scared or too tired to fight back. They didn't just want me gone. They needed me gone, because if one person stood up, if one person refused to bend, it might show others how to do the same. That night, as the cicadas screamed and the mist rolled low across the ground, I sat on the front porch and sharpened my focus. This wasn't a warning. It was a declaration of war, and they'd just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They woke up the wrong woman, and I wasn't planning to leave until I made damn sure they never forgot it. It didn't take long after the graffiti for them to move from threats to action. They tested my nerves, poked at the edges of my fear, and when I didn't flinch, they decided it was time to change tactics. No more warnings, no more games. It started with the noise. Middle of the night, just as I was finally slipping into the first real sleep I'd had in days, the sound of shattering glass jolted me awake. I bolted upright, heart hammering, mind scrambling to catch up. Another crash came from the back of the house. The unmistakable sound of a bottle smashing against the siding. The smell hit me A second later, gasoline, heavy and thick in the air. I grabbed my phone and crawled to the window, staying low. Peeking through the curtain, I caught a glimpse of two figures, running toward a pickup, parked a few houses down. Their faces obscured by hoodies, moving fast. Tires screeched as they peeled away, leaving the street empty and silent again. The fire didn't catch, thank God, but they'd made their point. This wasn't about scaring me anymore. This was about forcing me out. I called it in, half expecting nobody to show up, but a cruiser rolled by 20 minutes later, lights flashing lazily. No siren, Deputy Crowley. I recognized him from the diner, the one who couldn't stop sneering at me. He stepped out of the car, all fake concern and swagger, took a long look at the broken glass and the scorched patch of grass, then sauntered over like he had all the time in the world. "Looks like some kids got a little rowdy," he said, scratching his chin. "Shame about that," attempted arson. I corrected him sharply. "You plan on doing anything about it?" He gave me a slow smile, the kind that made my skin crawl. "We'll file a report," he said. "Doubt we'll find much, but, we'll take a look around." I knew better than to argue. Nothing I said was going to make a difference tonight. He took a half-hearted statement, barely writing anything down, then tipped his hat like he'd just done me a favor, and disappeared into the night. By morning, the scorch marks were still there, the broken glass still glinting in the driveway like tiny knives. No one stopped by. No neighbors asked if I was okay. Ashford Springs had decided I was on my own. I spent the day reinforcing the house, installing the new deadbolts, nailing shut the windows that didn't lock right. I wasn't naive enough to think it would stop them if they really wanted in, but it made me feel like I was doing something, like I wasn't just sitting there waiting to be a victim. By dusk, I was exhausted but wired, nerves buzzing under my skin. I sat on the porch again, a habit now, tea cooling in my hands, watching the street. That's when the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. I hesitated for a second before answering, "Hello?" A pause, just breathing on the other end. Then a voice, low, male, unfamiliar. "You might want to check your car, sweetheart." The line went dead before I could respond. I shot to my feet, heart slamming into my ribs. The SUV sat in the driveway, where I'd left it. Nothing looked obviously wrong from a distance. I grabbed a flashlight, staying close to the shadows as I crept toward it. The first thing I noticed was the smell sharp, metallic. The second thing was the dark puddle spreading out from underneath the car. I crouched low, shining the beam of light beneath the chassis. Every tire had been slashed, and someone had ripped open the fuel line. Gasoline dripped steadily onto the gravel, the smell so strong it made my eyes water. It wasn't just vandalism. It was a message. You're trapped. You're alone. You're vulnerable. I stood there for a long moment, breathing through the rising panic. This was it. This was the moment they were trying to create. Isolation, fear, desperation. Get her scared enough, tired enough, cornered enough, and she'll leave. But what they didn't realize was that they weren't pushing me away. They were backing me into a corner, and there's nothing more dangerous than a woman who has nowhere left to run. I pulled my phone back out, hands steady now, and started documenting everything, photos, video, every angle I could get. They wanted a war? They were about to get one. The next day, a flyer showed up taped to the front door. A community meeting. At the church. Topic: protecting Ashford Springs from outside agitators. No names. No specific accusations. But the timing wasn't a coincidence. They were calling their army to arms, and they expected me to either run or show up stupid. I smiled to myself as I pulled the flyer down and folded it neatly into my pocket. Let them gather. Let them talk. I wasn't the one who should be afraid, because if Ashford Springs thought this was going to end with me packing a bag and slinking away under cover of darkness, They had no idea what kind of fight they'd just started. I didn't come here looking for trouble, but I wasn't about to run from it either. I didn't go to the church meeting planning to pick a fight. I went because I wanted to look them in the eye. The ones who spray painted my garage. The ones who slashed my tires. The ones who thought they could run me out of town with dead birds and broken glass if they were going to stand there and talk about me like I was a virus. The least they could do was say it to my face. The parking lot was already half full when I pulled up in a borrowed car, a beat-up sedan Miguel had loaned me after my SUV got taken out. The sun was sinking low, the sky bruising purple and gold, and the cicadas were already screaming from the trees. The church was old, white paint peeling in long strips down the sides, the steeple leaning a little like it was tired of holding itself upright. A banner hung across the front. Protect our home. Protect our future. One wasn't naive. I knew what they meant by our, and it wasn't me. Inside, the air was thick with sweat and cheap perfume. Rows of folding chairs had been set up facing the pulpit, where Sheriff Daniels stood with a microphone, smiling like a man who'd just cornered a wounded animal. The crowd was bigger than I expected. 50, maybe 60 people. Farmers, shop owners, retirees in pressed shirts and Sunday dresses. Faces I'd seen at the diner, at the hardware store, staring over their coffee cups, looking through me like I didn't exist. Until now. Now, every pair of eyes in that room turned when I walked in, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Daniel's smile widened. "Well, look who decided to join us," he drawled, and the crowd gave a few low chuckles. "Maybe it's good she's here. Maybe she'll learn something about respecting her neighbors." I didn't react, didn't flinch, just found an empty chair in the back and sat down. The meeting was a masterclass in coded language. They talked about outsiders bringing dangerous ideas, about preserving tradition, about standing together against threats. Nobody said my name. Nobody had to. Every word was a brick in the wall they were building around me. After an hour of thinly veiled hatred, they wrapped it up with a prayer for unity and safety, and everyone shuffled out into the cooling night air, murmuring to each other, casting glances back at me. I stayed in my seat for a minute, waiting for the parking lot to thin out. No sense getting boxed in by a mob, hopped up on righteousness and fear. When I finally stepped outside, the lot was almost empty, a few cars idling, headlights cutting long slices through the dusk. I kept my head up, my pace steady, keys gripped tight between my fingers. I didn't see them until it was too late. Two shadows peeled off from behind the church, moving fast. Big men, heavy boots, scuffing against the pavement. I barely had time to turn before they were on me. Rough hands grabbed my arms, yanking them behind my back. "Thought you were real smart, didn't you?" One of them hissed in my ear, breath hot and sour. I twisted, tried to pull free, but they were too strong. Someone's elbow jammed into my ribs, knocking the wind out of me. My knees buckled. I opened my mouth to scream, but a gloved hand clamped over it, cutting the sound to a muffled grunt. They dragged me across the lot, behind a line of hedges where no headlights could reach. My heart pounded so hard I could barely think, blood roaring in my ears. This was it. This was the moment they'd been pushing toward. They shoved me into the bed of a pickup truck, the metal burning hot from the day's heat. Rope bit into my wrists as they tied me down, rough and fast, like they'd done it before. I fought. God, I fought, kicked, thrashed, managed to land a solid heel into someone's shin. Heard him curse, but it didn't matter. There were two of them, and only one of me. One tied my ankles together, tight and hard. The other looped a thick coil of rope around the bindings, securing it to a hook bolted into the truck bed. They slammed the tailgate shut, locking me inside. Then the engine rumbled to life. I lay there, chest heaving, wrists burning, head spinning. as the truck jolted forward, carrying me away from the faint lights of the church. No one saw, no one followed, and no one would speak of it come morning. Ashford Springs had decided what justice looked like, and I was about to be on the receiving end of it. The truck bounced and rattled over gravel roads, turning deeper into the woods, where the trees grew thick and close, and the night pressed in like a living thing. I counted turns, listened for landmarks. Anything to orient myself, anything that might help later, if there was a later. After what felt like forever, the truck skidded to a stop. The tailgate dropped open with a bang. Hands grabbed me again, yanking me upright, cutting the ties on my wrists, but leaving my ankles bound. I stumbled, blinking in the darkness. Ahead of us, a twisted oak tree rose against the starlit sky, its branches like broken arms reaching toward the heavens. They dragged me toward it, rough and wordless, and somewhere deep inside me, a small, steady voice whispered, "This isn't where you end. This is where you begin." The rope bit into my ankles as they hoisted me up, rough hands pulling, tightening, grunting under the strain. I fought. I kicked. I twisted. But it didn't matter. The branch groaned overhead as my body swung up off the ground, weight pulling against the bindings. I flipped upside down, the blood rushing instantly to my head, the world spinning, tilting. They tied the other end of the rope around the thick branch, double-knotted it for good measure, and then they stepped back. Two white men in dark uniforms, faces shadowed by the night, standing there like they were admiring their handiwork. One of them lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his face. Crowley, I recognized him even upside down. The smirk was unmistakable. The other man, a little younger, heavier, crossed his arms and shook his head like I was an inconvenience he was tired of dealing with. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their message was loud and clear. I was a trophy, a warning, an example, and in Ashford Springs, examples didn't get to walk away. My body swayed slightly in the humid night air. The thick mist from the fields drifted in, curling around the base of the tree like smoke. The moon barely cut through it, a pale sickle hanging high above, useless and cold. I tried to focus, tried to slow my breathing. Panic would get me killed faster than anything. Already, my head was pounding from the blood pooling there. My hands dangled uselessly toward the dirt, fingers brushing empty air. My hair, wild and heavy with sweat, swung around my face, blinding me. I could hear my heart beat in my ears. Loud, frantic, Crowley flicked his cigarette into the grass and walked closer, boots crunching against the dry ground. He crouched down, peering up at me with a lazy grin. "You should have left when you had the chance," he said, voice low and ugly. "Now you're going to be part of the landscape." I didn't answer, wouldn't give him the satisfaction. He chuckled and stood back up, spitting into the dirt. "Let's go," he said to the other one. "She ain't going nowhere." And just like that, they climbed back into the truck and drove off, the red taillights shrinking into the darkness until they were gone, leaving me there, swinging, alone. At first, I fought the urge to scream. It clawed at the back of my throat, raw and desperate, but I bit it down. There was no one to hear it out here. No one who would help even if they did. Instead, I forced myself to think. I twisted slowly, body swaying in lazy circles. The rope creaked overhead with every movement, every tiny shift of weight. The branch felt solid, but I couldn't be sure how much stress it could take. And my ankles, they were already burning. Every minute hanging like this cut deeper, bruising, tearing at ligaments not meant to bear this kind of pull. I had hours. Maybe, if no one found me, if I couldn't free myself. Eventually, the circulation would cut off, the blood vessels would burst, and then I pushed the thought away. Focus. Breathe. Survive. I bent at the waist as much as I could, reaching for the rope around my ankles, My shoulders screamed in protest, muscles pulling painfully against joints already stretched too far. My fingertips brushed the knot, but couldn't get a grip. Not enough leverage. Not enough strength. I let my body relax for a second, letting the blood flow a little differently, giving my arms a tiny break. Think, Naomi, think. If I could swing myself, build enough momentum, maybe I could hook my legs on the branch somehow, maybe climb up. It was a long shot, a stupid shot, but it was something. I started shifting my weight, swinging gently at first, back and forth, back and forth. The rope groaned in protest. The branch above creaked, but I kept going, back, forth, back, forth. Each arc a little higher, each sway a little faster. The world blurred around me, the trees, the stars, the ground, all spinning in dizzying circles. I reached up again, fingers clawing desperately at the rope, trying to pull myself up inch by inch. Pain exploded through my shoulders. I bit my lip until I tasted blood, refusing to scream, refusing to give them that. But it wasn't enough. I didn't have the strength. Not like this. Not now. The swing slowed. The effort drained out of me, like water through a sieve, and I hung there, breathing hard, vision swimming, the edges of the world starting to fuzz and darken. I don't know how long I dangled there. Minutes, hours, lifetimes. Time didn't matter anymore. There was only the rope, the branch, and the slow, crushing realization that if help didn't come soon, I wasn't getting out of this. A memory floated up, unbidden. My mother's voice when I was a little girl, teaching me how to stand up after falling off my bike for the 5th time that afternoon. "You're stronger than the dirt, baby," she said, smiling down at me with fierce pride. "You just gotta remember it when it counts." Well, Mama, it counted now. And I wasn't about to forget. Somewhere, far off, a sound broke through the thick blanket of night. An engine, low and rumbling, getting closer. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. Was it them coming back to finish the job? Another deputy? Some local who thought they'd earn a gold star for getting rid of the problem for good. The truck pulled into the clearing, headlights cutting twin beams through the mist. I squinted into the glare, heart lodged in my throat. A figure stepped out, small, wiry, moving fast. Not a uniform, not Crowley. Someone else. Someone running toward me. I couldn't see his face, not yet, but hope flared so bright in my chest. It hurt worse than the rope. Maybe, just maybe, Ashford Springs hadn't turned its back on every last piece of its own humanity. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone after all. The footsteps hit the ground fast, reckless, crunching against the gravel like whoever was running didn't care who heard. Through the haze of blood rushing in my head, I strained to lift my gaze. At first, all I could make out was a blur. A man, young, wiry, moving with frantic energy. He stumbled into the clearing, panting hard, scanning the dark like he was expecting an ambush. His eyes locked onto me hanging there, and for half a second, he froze. I couldn't blame him. What kind of nightmare must it have looked like? A woman swinging upside down from a tree, rope cutting into her ankles, mist coiling around the ground like ghostly fingers. But then he snapped out of it, rushed forward, hands fumbling at his belt, yanking out a pocket knife. "It's okay! It's okay!" he said, voice shaking as he reached for the rope. "I got you." The knife glinted in the moonlight. A small, battered thing, but sharp enough. He grabbed the rope just above my ankles and started sawing. The fibers strained, splitting one by one. My heart hammered against my ribs, every nerve ending screaming with the need to be free. The rope snapped with a harsh pop. I dropped like a stone. He caught me, barely, staggering back a step under my weight, but somehow managing not to let me slam into the dirt. I gasped as the blood surged back into my legs. pain exploding like fireworks under my skin. My body went into shock, trembling so violently I thought I might fly apart. "Hey, hey," he murmured, lowering me gently to the ground. "You're okay. You're safe now. I got you." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him, but the world tilted and swam, everything blurry at the edges. He crouched beside me, hands moving quick but gentle, checking my wrists, my ankles, murmuring reassurances under his breath. "You're gonna be all right," he said again. Even though we both knew that wasn't a promise he could keep, his face finally came into focus. Young, early 20s maybe, Latino, tan skin smeared with sweat and dirt, short dark hair sticking to his forehead. Fear etched every line of his face, but not fear for himself. Fear for me. "You're hurt bad," he said, "but I can get you help. I got a truck." "Not far." I tried to nod. "Couldn't manage it." He took that as agreement anyway. Somehow, he lifted me, arms under my back and knees, and started carrying me through the trees. Every step jarred something deep and aching inside me, but I bit down hard and kept silent. No way I was making it harder than it already was. The night closed in around us, thick and heavy. Crickets sang in the distance. Somewhere far off, an owl called once, twice. The truck came into view, a battered old Ford, paint peeling, headlights off. He laid me gently in the back seat, grabbing a threadbare blanket from behind the seats and tucking it around me like I was something fragile. He slammed the door, ran around to the driver's side, and climbed in. The engine coughed once, twice, then caught with a rumble. We peeled out of the clearing fast, gravel spitting up behind us. I watched the twisted oak tree shrink in the rearview mirror, swallowed by mist and darkness, until it disappeared completely. He drove like a man possessed, one hand gripping the wheel, the other drumming anxiously against his thigh. "You don't know me," he said after a long minute, voice tight. "Name's Miguel. I work the farms out west. I wasn't supposed to be out there tonight. My buddy's truck broke down, so I was cutting across the fields." He glanced over at me, eyes flickering with something raw and earnest. "God must have put me there," he said. "Ain't no other reason," I tried to speak, to say thank you, to say anything, but the words tangled in my throat. He seemed to understand. "Don't worry," he said. "Just rest. I'm gonna get you safe." The farther we got from the clearing, the easier it was to breathe. But the pain didn't fade. It gnawed at me, sharp and deep, a reminder that survival was just the first step. Miguel didn't head for the local hospital. He wasn't stupid. Instead, he turned onto the old back roads, driving another 30 miles into the next county. Somewhere, they didn't know me. Somewhere, the sheriff's badge didn't mean a damn thing. The truck bounced and rattled over potholes, but he kept going, talking the whole way about his family back in Texas, about working the fields for men who barely looked at him, about how he knew what it felt like to be invisible, until someone decided you were a problem. I listened, half lucid, clinging to the sound of his voice like a tether. It kept me grounded, kept me awake, kept me fighting. Finally, we pulled into a dimly lit parking lot behind a small hospital. Miguel jumped out, ran around, and opened my door. "Hold on," he said. Almost there, he flagged down a nurse just inside the emergency entrance, talking fast, gesturing wildly. I saw her face go from confusion to horror in a heartbeat. Then hands, cool, professional, lifting me onto a gurney. The bright, overhead lights stabbing into my skull. The soft rush of wheels on tile. Voices, urgent, overlapping, BPs dropping. "Get her fluids started. We need a trauma team now." And through it all, Miguel's voice, firm and steady. "Don't you give up," he said, leaning over me as they wheeled me away. "You hear me? You fight." I wanted to tell him I wasn't done fighting. Not even close. But the world slid sideways. The light dimmed, and for the first time that night, I let myself fall into the dark, not because I was giving up, because now, finally, I wasn't alone. Waking up felt like clawing through wet cement. Every inch of me hurt. My ankles throbbed. My shoulders screamed. My head pounded with a dull, steady drumbeat. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. All I could see were blurred shapes, too bright, too white. Voices floated around me, muffled like I was underwater. Then, a sharp beeping sound. Machines, monitors, a hospital. I tried to turn my head, and pain lanced through my neck like a hot knife. Someone noticed. A hand touched my arm, firm but gentle. "You're safe," a voice said. "Female, calm. You're in a hospital. You're going to be okay." I forced my eyes open wider, blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights. A nurse leaned over me, her face kind but tired. "You're lucky," she said. "Real lucky." I didn't feel lucky. I felt like I'd been chewed up and spit out by something bigger and meaner than I'd ever faced before. But I was alive, and that counted for something. I drifted in and out for hours, or maybe days. Time had lost all meaning, while nurses came and went, adjusting IVs, checking monitors, whispering to each other in that careful way medical staff does when they're trying not to scare the patient. At some point, I managed to croak out a question. "The man who brought me in, is he okay?" The nurse smiled softly. "He's fine. He's been checking on you. Refused to leave for the first few hours. We finally made him go get some rest. Miguel, I owed him everything. And if I ever got out of this bed, I was going to make damn sure he knew it." By the second day, my mind started clearing. The pain dulled enough that I could think straight, and what I thought about, over and over, was Ashford Springs, Sheriff Daniels, Deputy Crowley, the tree, the rope, the message they thought they'd carved into my bones. Leave, give up, disappear. They didn't know me at all. On the third day, Rachel called. The nurse brought the phone into the room, holding it carefully like it might explode. I grabbed it with hands that still shook from weakness, but tightened around the receiver like it was a lifeline. "Naomi." Rachel's voice cracked through the line, low and urgent. "Oh my God," I thought. "I'm here," I rasped, voice raw from disuse. "I'm alive." Tears blurred my vision, but I blinked them away. "Are you safe?" she demanded. "Where are you?" I gave her the name of the hospital. "The next county over." She cursed softly under her breath. "You're not going back there," she said. "You hear me? I don't care what they did. We're blowing this wide open." I closed my eyes, exhausted but smiling a little. Rachel always had fire to spare. "I'm not done yet," I said, and I meant it. After we hung up, I lay there staring at the ceiling, letting the weight of it all settle on my chest. They tried to kill me. They hung me from a tree like I was some relic of a world we were supposed to have buried 100 years ago. They wanted me broken, silenced, erased. But instead, they'd handed me the biggest weapon I could ask for, the truth. Later that afternoon, a doctor came in, young, nervous, trying too hard to look confident. He cleared his throat and avoided my eyes as he spoke. "Miss Ellis," he said, glancing down at the clipboard, "we just need to ask a few questions." "For the report," I nodded, wincing as the movement pulled at every sore muscle. "Do you know who attacked you?" he asked. I stared at him for a long moment, before answering, choosing my words carefully. "No," I said, "not yet, because the truth was, if I named names now, if I gave them even an inch, Daniels would find a way to shut it down, cover it up, make it disappear. I needed more proof, witnesses, and the right moment to strike." The doctor made a few notes, thanked me awkwardly, and fled the room. "Good. Let them wonder. Let them worry. By evening, Miguel showed up. He knocked softly before poking his head into the room, a shy smile tugging at his mouth. "You look better," he said, stepping inside, hands shoved into the pockets of his worn jeans. "Depends on your definition of better," I croaked. He laughed, the sound light and a little broken, moved closer, sat in the plastic chair by the bed. I'm real sorry," he said, voice low. "I should have got to you sooner." I shook my head. "You got there exactly when I needed you." He ducked his head, embarrassed, but I caught the flicker of pride that crossed his face. "You're gonna make it," he said firmly. Like if he said it enough, it would be true, and maybe it would be... I owed him more than I could ever repay. But right now, all I could do was survive, heal, and get ready for the next fight. Because make no mistake, Ashford Springs hadn't seen the last of me, not by a long shot. The first crack in the wall came quicker than I expected. 2 days after I woke up, still bruised, still bandaged, still fighting every time I took a breath, Rachel made her move. I knew something was happening when the nurses started acting different. They weren't cold, exactly, just careful, nervous. Whispers floated through the halls. Glances shot in my direction when they thought I wasn't looking. By mid-afternoon, the news broke. Rachel hadn't gone small. She went national. She published everything we'd been sitting on for months. All the records, all the interviews, all the proof of a dirty sheriff's department rotting from the inside out. And she didn't stop there. She dropped the bomb they never saw coming. She told the world who I really was. Not just a woman passing through, not just a legal aid worker, an undercover federal investigator, sent specifically to Ashford Springs to look into decades of civil rights abuses. They hadn't just attacked a nobody. They'd attacked the one person with enough power to burn their whole operation to the ground. The article was brutal, sharp as broken glass. No mercy, no euphemisms. It laid everything bare, the corruption, the intimidation, the violence. And my name was right there, in bold print, Naomi Ellis, federal agent, survivor. The internet exploded within hours. Twitter, Facebook, cable news, all of it lit up like a forest fire. Outrage poured in from every corner of the country. Demands for investigations. Demands for resignations. Demands for justice. Ashford Springs couldn't pretend anymore. Couldn't hide behind their white picket fences and rusty old badges. Not when the whole world was watching. Rachel called me that evening, her voice buzzing with adrenaline. "You should see it," she said. "They're scrambling." Daniels tried to give a press conference, and people booed him off the courthouse steps. I let out a weak laugh, every rib protesting the movement. "Good," I said. "It wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was a start." Rachel's tone shifted, sharpening. "We're just getting warmed up," she said. "This is only part one." She had more audio recordings, video evidence, witnesses who were finally finding their voices now that they realized they weren't alone. "They're scared," she said, "and scared people make mistakes." I knew that too well. Fear made people sloppy. Fear made people desperate. And desperate men with badges could be the most dangerous animals on earth. But we weren't backing down. Not this time. The next morning, the first protest sparked. A group of about 20 locals, black, white, Latino, gathered on the courthouse lawn, holding homemade signs. "Justice for Naomi. End the corruption. We deserve better." Miguel sent me pictures, grainy, a little blurry, but powerful. People standing shoulder to shoulder in a town that had been ruled by fear for too long. It wasn't a flood yet, but it was a crack in the dam. And once a dam starts cracking, it's only a matter of time. Meanwhile, Daniels and his cronies doubled down. They put out statements denying everything. Called me a liar. Called Rachel a hack journalist. Claimed the real victims were the hard-working officers whose reputations were being smeared. Classic, predictable, pathetic, and useless. The more they shouted, the guiltier they looked. Ashford Springs wasn't sleeping well these days. Businesses started locking their doors early. Neighbors who used to pretend not to see me now huddled together, whispering nervously. Everyone sensed the shift, even if they didn't understand it yet. The town wasn't just angry anymore. It was scared, because for the first time in decades, the people who held the power were being dragged into the light, and rot hates the light. At the hospital, the staff started treating me differently too. The wary glances turned into nods of respect. The careful silence turned into quiet words of encouragement, slipped between blood pressure checks and the fourth changes. "You're brave," one nurse whispered, squeezing my hand when she thought no one was looking. "Thank you for fighting." I didn't feel brave. I felt broken. But broken didn't mean defeated. Broken could be rebuilt. Stronger, sharper, more dangerous than before. Late that night, when the hospital halls had gone quiet and the machines beeped soft and steady beside my bed, I stared out the window into the endless dark and made a promise to myself. I wasn't just going to survive Ashford Springs. I was going to rip the rot out by its roots, no matter how long it took, no matter how much it cost, no matter how many times they tried to break me. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The first protest had been small, a few brave souls, tired of whispering behind closed doors. But by the end of the week, the spark had turned into a fire. It started with a trickle, a couple more people showing up every afternoon at the courthouse steps, holding hand-painted signs, faces set with grim determination. Then it grew. By Saturday, there were nearly 100 people gathered, and this time, they weren't just standing around, hoping someone would notice. They were marching. They were chanting. They were demanding answers. And for the first time in a long, long time, Ashford Springs wasn't ruled by silence. Miguel sent me videos from his phone. Shaky, grainy footage of the crowd weaving through the streets. Young and old, black and white, arm in arm. Their voices rose together, raw and powerful. Justice for Naomi and the corruption. Ashford Springs deserves better. I watched those videos lying in my hospital bed, a lump forming in my throat so tight I could barely breathe. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was bigger than that. They weren't just fighting for me. They were fighting for themselves. For every stolen voice, for every quiet injustice no one had dared name until now. And Daniels? He was feeling the heat. Hard to deny a problem when the whole town is shouting it from the rooftops. Sheriff Daniels called a press conference that same afternoon. Miguel filmed it from across the street. Daniels stood on the courthouse steps, flanked by a half-dozen deputies who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. He squinted into the sunlight, sweating through his uniform, trying to project that same smug authority he always had. But it didn't land this time. His voice shook when he spoke. His hands gripped the podium a little too tight. And the crowd, they didn't boo, they didn't heckle. They turned their backs. Hundreds of people, silent, united, refusing to give him even the dignity of being heard. It was brutal, and it was perfect. I smiled for the first time in days. Later that evening, Rachel called. Her voice was electric, buzzing with adrenaline and hope. "You did it," she said. "You broke them open." "No," I corrected her. "We did it, because without her, without Miguel, without every single person who decided enough was enough, I'd still be hanging from that tree in the dark, forgotten, erased." The next morning, the real hammer fell. State investigators rolled into town. black SUVs, stern faces, clipboards and badges flashing in the sunlight. They set up shop in the courthouse basement, and one by one, the rats started scrambling. Some deputies called in sick, some packed up their desks and vanished. A few, the smart ones, started talking. Deals were made. Names were dropped. Skeletons were dragged kicking and screaming out of closets that had stayed locked for decades. And Daniels? He dug in his heels. He held press conferences. He went on local radio shows. He screamed about witch hunts and fake news and loyalty. But it didn't matter. The tide had turned, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do to stop it. Meanwhile, I got stronger. Every day, a little more, a little further out of bed, a little steadier on my feet. The doctors were amazed. The nurses whispered about it in the halls. But I knew the truth. It wasn't medicine healing me. It was fury. It was hope. It was unfinished business burning hot in my blood. By the time they cleared me for release, I was ready. Miguel was waiting outside the hospital in his beat-up Ford, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. He helped me into the truck, careful of my bruises, and handed me a brown paper bag. "What's this?" I asked. He just winked. Fuel. Inside was a burger, greasy and hot and perfect, and a battered copy of the local newspaper. The headline stretched across the front page in bold black letters. Federal agent targeted by sheriff's department. I laughed, a rough, painful sound, and bit into the burger with tears stinging my eyes. This was just the beginning. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I wasn't going to wait for permission. Ashford Springs was my fight now, and I was ready to take it all the way. The first thing I did when I left that hospital was breathe. Really breathe. Not the shallow, panicked gasps I'd survived on for days. Not the tight, bitter gulps I'd choked down in the dark. A real breath. Deep, slow, steady. I was still sore, still bruised, still stitched together with stubbornness and sheer rage, but I was free. And I wasn't running anymore. Miguel dropped me off at a safe house, a small apartment just outside town, rented under a name that wasn't mine, paid for in cash. Rachel had arranged it. She thought it would give me space to heal, to regroup. She didn't realize I wasn't interested in healing. I was interested in fighting. That night, I sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by notes, maps, copies of old police reports, stacks of interviews Rachel had gathered. The truth, laid out in paper and ink and blood. And I built a plan. Daniels had power, decades of it, rooted deep in Ashford Springs like a cancer. If I wanted to bring him down, I couldn't just shout louder than him. I had to cut him off at the knees, take away the fear he used to control the town, expose every dirty secret he tried to bury. And I needed help to do it. The next morning, I made calls, not to the state police. They were already sniffing around, but they moved slow, tangled in bureaucracy. I called the ones Daniels feared most: civil rights attorneys, federal investigators, journalists hungry for a story that could win awards. I fed them everything, every file, every name, every date, and I made them a promise. You help me, and I'll give you the story of a lifetime. By noon, the machine was rolling. Legal teams were drafting motions. Investigators were pulling Daniels' financial records. News crews were setting up shop just outside town. Cameras pointed straight at the courthouse. Ashford Springs was about to become the epicenter of a storm it couldn't survive. And for the first time, Daniels wasn't holding the leash. Miguel stayed close, half bodyguard, half co-conspirator. He ran errands, tracked gossip at the diner, watched the comings and goings at the sheriff's department like a hawk. Every night he came back with news. The deputies were getting restless. Some had stopped showing up for work. Some were drinking too much and talking too loud in bars. And a few, the ones who still had some shred of decency left, were starting to crack. They wanted out. They wanted deals. And they were willing to trade information to get them. It was only a matter of time now. One evening, as I sat sifting through a fresh batch of files, Miguel leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching me with a half smile. "You know," he said, "you're kind of scary when you're like this." I looked up, arching an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Focused," he said. "Determined. Dangerous." The first smiled. It didn't feel like a compliment. It felt like the truth. Because the woman they tried to hang from a tree was gone. In her place stood something harder, sharper, unbreakable. That night, I wrote my own speech, a letter to Ashford Springs. Not an apology, not a plea, a warning. I wasn't leaving. I wasn't backing down, and no amount of threats, no amount of violence was going to change that. Rachel helped me film it, one take, raw and unpolished. Sitting in front of a plain white wall with nothing but my voice and my scars, I told the truth about what had happened to me, about what Daniels had built, about what we all had the power to tear down. When we uploaded it, I didn't expect much, maybe a few shares, maybe a few comments, but within hours, it exploded. Tens of thousands of views. Messages pouring in from across the country. Support, outrage, promises to stand with me. The next morning, I woke up to find a line of protesters stretching down Main Street, holding signs, chanting, refusing to move even when deputies showed up and tried to bully them back inside. Ashford Springs was changing, cracking open from the inside out, and Daniels was starting to drown. His own men were defecting. His own townspeople were turning their backs. His power, the fear he built everything on, was crumbling like dust. Miguel grinned as he watched the news coverage, shaking his head in disbelief. "You did it," he said. I shook my head slowly. "We're just getting started." Because justice wasn't just about exposing the rot. It was about digging it out, root and stem, until there was nothing left but clean earth and the possibility of something better. And I wasn't stopping until that ground was cleared. The cracks were starting to show, and not just in the sheriff's office. You could feel it all over Ashford Springs. The tension that used to hide behind tight smiles and polite nods was out in the open now. Raw, ugly, uncontrollable. People who had once looked away were now shouting across grocery aisles. Neighbors who used to pretend not to see were hanging homemade signs on their front porches. The whole town was dividing, line by jagged line, and no amount of Sunday sermons or desperate public statements was going to stitch it back together. Daniels must have thought he could smother the fire by throwing more fuel on it. He ramped up patrols, sent deputies door to door, checking in on the most vocal protesters. Some of them got citations for ridiculous things, disturbing the peace, blocking public access, loitering. One man got fined for having a broken taillight on a car that had been sitting on blocks in his driveway for 3 years. It was laughable. It was desperate. And it was making everything worse. The harder Daniels squeezed, the faster the town slipped through his fingers. I watched it happen from my little apartment outside town, safe behind layers of locks and shadows. Miguel and Rachel kept me updated. Text messages, quick calls, photos and videos that showed a town on the edge of something huge. One afternoon, Miguel burst through the door, out of breath and grinning. "You are not going to believe this," he said, tossing a crumpled flyer onto the table. It was a poster, glossy, professional-looking, slapped together in a panic by Daniels' people. Big, bold letters across the top. "Protect Ashford Springs. Say no to outsiders." Beneath it, a picture of me, not a mugshot, not a still frame from some secret camera, Just a photo someone must have snapped at the diner that first week. Me sitting alone by the window, coffee cup in hand, eyes tired but unbroken. They didn't even try to hide it anymore. I was the enemy. I traced the edges of the flyer with my fingertip, feeling a strange mix of anger and grim satisfaction. They were scared, and scared men make stupid choices. Rachel called that night, her voice crackling through the bad reception. "We got 'em cornered," she said. "Sources say Daniels is holding secret meetings. He's trying to rally support, but it's not working. Too many people have flipped. Too much dirt's already out." I leaned back against the wall, letting the words sink in. It was happening. It was finally happening. But I knew better than to celebrate too soon. Cornered animals were the most dangerous kind, and Daniels wasn't the type to go down without clawing at everything around him first. The next morning proved me right. Miguel showed up pale and furious, pacing the kitchen like a caged lion. "They arrested Marcus," he said, voice tight. Marcus, one of the first men brave enough to march downtown with a sign that read "Justice for Naomi." One of the ones who stood with me before the cameras ever showed up. They said he assaulted a deputy. Miguel spat, but I was there. "Naomi? He didn't touch nobody. They just grabbed him." My stomach twisted, cold and heavy. This wasn't law enforcement. This was revenge. Plain and simple. I grabbed my jacket, ignoring the stab of pain that shot through my ribs. "Where are they holding him?" I asked. Miguel's eyes widened. "You're not serious. You can't walk into that building, Naomi. I'm not walking in alone," I said. "I'm walking in with the press." 20 minutes later, Rachel pulled up outside in a rental car packed with cameras, microphones, and 2 reporters from a national news network who smelled blood in the water. We didn't sneak. We didn't creep. We walked right up the courthouse steps, like we owned the place. Deputies at the door shifted nervously when they saw the cameras. Rachel shoved a microphone in their faces before they could speak. "Is it standard procedure in Ashford Springs to arrest peaceful protesters without cause?" she asked sweetly. The deputies froze, caught between fear and orders they knew wouldn't hold up under this kind of scrutiny. It took 30 minutes. 30 minutes of phone calls, whispers, nervous glances, and then Marcus walked out, bruised but smiling, into a hail of camera flashes and cheers from the crowd gathering outside. Daniels didn't show his face. Coward, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. By that evening, the story had gone viral again. Footage of Marcus being dragged into the courthouse, footage of him walking free, fist raised high in defiance. Ashford Springs wasn't just a local scandal anymore. It was a national embarrassment. And Daniels? He was running out of moves. Miguel sat with me that night on the tiny apartment balcony, sharing a greasy bag of fries and a victory we didn't dare celebrate too loudly yet. "You think he'll step down?" he asked around a mouthful of food. I shook my head. Not a chance. Daniels was too arrogant, too stubborn. He would fight to the bitter, bloody end. And that was fine, because I wasn't leaving anything on the table. Not this time. I was going to bring him down. Brick by brick, badge by badge, lie by lie, and when I was done, there wouldn't be enough left of the old Ashford Springs to bury. It always happens the same way. You push enough, crack the right places, and eventually, the whole rotten structure caves in on itself. That's what was happening now. Daniel's empire wasn't just crumbling, it was collapsing at freefall speed. The first real break came 2 days after Marcus walked free. A deputy, one of Daniels' own, walked into the local news station with a folder under his arm and a look on his face like a man carrying a live grenade. Inside the folder? Documents, phone records, emails, proof that the sheriff's department had been falsifying reports, covering up complaints, hiding evidence of misconduct for years. And not just petty stuff, either. Assaults, thefts, Even a suspicious death, ruled an accident, with no autopsy performed. The deputy, a guy named Foster, gave a quiet, shaky interview, said he couldn't live with it anymore, said the town deserved to know. He didn't ask for immunity, didn't ask for a deal. He just wanted to stop being part of the lie. When the story hit the airwaves, it was like someone dropped a match into a gas leak. The phones at the courthouse started ringing off the hook. The protest outside tripled in size. State investigators kicked down the front door of the sheriff's department with a search warrant in hand. They didn't even try to be subtle. They hauled out boxes of files, hard drives, radios, anything that could hold evidence. Miguel and I watched the whole thing live on TV, sitting on the floor in front of the tiny apartment's battered second-hand television set, sharing a bag of stale chips, and a feeling neither of us could quite name yet: relief. Vindication. Something bigger than either of those. The truth was out, and there was no stuffing it back into the shadows. Daniels tried to fight it. Of course, held another press conference, standing stiff and sweaty in front of the courthouse steps, claiming he was the real victim. Blamed outsiders, blamed the media, blamed me, without ever saying my name. But the crowd wasn't buying it. Not this time. They shouted him down, chanting louder and louder until he finally turned on his heel and stormed back inside, face red and tight with fury. That same night, 2 more deputies resigned. No notice, no statements. Just gone, Rachel called, her voice crackling with excitement through the bad connection. This is it, she said. This is the tipping point. I believed her, but I also knew better than to think Daniels would just roll over. Cornered animals don't surrender. They fight, they bite, they take as many down with them as they can. So I prepared. I met quietly with community leaders, organizers, lawyers. We talked about what came next. Not just bringing Daniels down, but building something better to replace him. Real oversight, real justice, real change. Because tearing down was easy compared to the hard work of rebuilding. And I wasn't about to let all of this suffering, all of this blood, be for nothing. Miguel was everywhere during those days, delivering messages, gathering intel, keeping an eye out for trouble. And trouble came sooner than we expected. Late one evening, as the sun bled out behind the hills, Miguel burst through the apartment door, breathless and wild-eyed. "They're planning something," he said. "Daniels and a few loyalists. They're scared, Naomi. Desperate. Word is, they're going to try something big to turn public opinion back in their favor." I tensed instantly, mind racing. "What kind of something?" Miguel shook his head. "Don't know yet, but whatever it is, it's happening soon." We didn't have long to wait. The very next morning, rumors started flying, wild stories about an attack on the sheriff's department, staged to look like it came from protesters. It was a setup, clear as day. Daniels was trying to paint himself as a victim one last time, hoping to drag the town's sympathies back onto his side before the roof caved in completely, but he'd underestimated just how much things had changed. When the so-called attack happened, a small fire conveniently contained before it could cause real damage. Nobody believed the official story. The people had seen too much, heard too much, lost too much. They weren't falling for it anymore. Instead of rallying around Daniels, the town turned on him harder, faster, more viciously than even I expected. By nightfall, the mayor, a man who had spent years hiding behind Daniels' broad shadow, publicly called for his resignation. State officials announced an emergency hearing. Civil rights organizations filed lawsuits so thick they might as well have been bricks smashing through every window of the old power structure. And me? I stayed quiet, focused, ready, because the fight wasn't over yet, but for the first time, I could see the end coming, not in some distant maybe, not in some fragile hope. I could feel it, taste it, coming fast. I wasn't just surviving Ashford Springs anymore. I was about to win. There's a moment when you stop hiding, when you stop surviving, when you stand up in the full light of day and dare them to come for you. That moment had come. I wasn't a secret anymore. I wasn't a whisper in the dark. I was the story, and I was done letting them control the narrative. Rachel called that morning, voice crackling with excitement. "They want you to speak," she said. "The protesters, the town, everybody's asking for you." I sat there for a long moment, the phone warm against my ear, feeling the weight of it settle across my shoulders. It wasn't fear that made me hesitate. It was understanding. Once I stepped out there, once I spoke, there was no going back, no more shields, no more walls. Just me, facing them, facing everything. I looked out the window. The streets below weren't empty anymore. They were full. Signs waving in the hot summer air. Voices chanting, demanding change. Faces lifted, fierce and unafraid. Miguel stood leaning against the counter, arms crossed, watching me. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just nodded once, like he already knew my answer. So I went. The sun beat down mercilessly as I made my way toward the courthouse steps, Miguel at my side, Rachel trailing behind with a camera slung over her shoulder. People saw me coming, and a path opened in the crowd. Not fear, not rejection, respect. Hope. The kind of hope that hurts because it's so raw, so desperate. I climbed the steps slowly, feeling every scrape of the concrete under my boots, every stare pressed against my skin. At the top, I turned to face them. Hundreds of people, packed into the square, more spilling out onto the side streets, more arriving every minute. Reporters jostled for space. Cameras rolled, microphones thrust toward me, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. I raised the microphone Rachel handed me and took a breath. "My name," I said, voice steady, "is Naomi Ellis." A ripple moved through the crowd, 1,000 held breaths, let out all at once. "I came to Ashford Springs to find the truth," I said, "and what I found was worse than I ever imagined." I told them everything about the corruption, about the cover-ups, about the fear that had ruled this town for far too long. I told them about the night under the tree, the rope, the betrayal. I didn't spare the ugly details. They needed to hear it. They deserved to hear it. And when I finished, I lowered the microphone and let the silence settle over them. It wasn't a weak silence. It wasn't confusion or fear. It was the kind of silence that comes just before something breaks loose. And then applause, loud and fierce and rising like a wave. Chants breaking out again, justice for Naomi. No more fear. Take back our town. It rolled over me like a tide, so strong I had to grip the edge of the podium to keep from staggering. Miguel caught my eye from the edge of the crowd, grinning, proud. Rachel gave me a thumbs up, already speaking urgently into her headset, coordinating live feeds back to national news stations. This wasn't just about Ashford Springs anymore. It was bigger. It was about every town that had been silenced, every voice that had been buried, every life that had been stolen in the dark while the rest of the world looked away. And Daniels? He felt it too, because an hour later, word came down. The sheriff was issuing a statement. No cameras allowed, no reporters, just a printed release, slid under the courthouse door like a coward's surrender note. In it, Daniels ranted about outside interference and false narratives, claimed he was stepping down for the good of the community. No apology, no admission of guilt, just bitterness and bile, clinging to power with bloody fingernails until the very last second. But it didn't matter. He was out. And Ashford Springs? Ashford Springs was ours now. Miguel found me later that evening, sitting on the courthouse steps with my head in my hands, exhausted but too wired to sleep. He dropped down beside me with a soft grunt. "You did it," he said. "No," I corrected him, smiling tiredly. "We did it." The stars were starting to come out, faint pinpricks against the deepening blue, and for the first time, in a long, long time, the night didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a beginning, a blank page, a clean slate, waiting to be written. Winning wasn't the end. It never is. Anyone who tells you different has never lived through a real fight, because after the shouting dies down, after the banners come down and the cameras pack up and leave, what's left is the wreckage. And someone's got to clean it up. Someone's got to rebuild. Ashford Springs wasn't magically healed because Daniels was gone. If anything, pulling out the infection made it clear just how deep the rot had gone. We stood in the ruins of a town that had been rotting for decades, and we had to figure out how to make something new out of it. The first days after Daniels stepped down were chaos. Nobody knew who was in charge. The deputies who hadn't resigned were in hiding, scared to show their faces. The mayor tried to pretend he hadn't spent the last 20 years kissing Daniels' boots. And the people? They were angry. They were confused. They were hurting. It would have been easy to let it all fall apart, to walk away, leave the ashes where they lay, start over somewhere else, somewhere safer. But that's not what we fought for. We didn't fight just to tear down. We fought so something better could rise in its place. So we stayed. We organized. We worked. Rachel stayed too, at least for a little while. She used her connections to bring in legal teams, civil rights experts, constitutional lawyers, people who knew how to dismantle broken systems without burning everything to the ground. Miguel threw himself into the work like a man possessed. He helped form neighborhood watch groups, trained volunteers, set up food drives for the families who were struggling because the town's economy had been gutted by the scandal. And me? I met with anyone who wanted to talk, in churches, in school gyms, in backyards, and broken-down coffee shops, listening, answering questions, taking the heat when old wounds cracked open and bled all over again. Not everyone was ready to move forward. There were plenty who still clung to the old ways, who whispered that things were better when certain people knew their place. There were plenty who wanted to pretend nothing had ever happened, that Daniels was some kind of fallen hero instead of the monster we all knew he was. But they were the minority now. Their voices still loud, still hateful, but no longer the only ones that mattered. We held elections, real ones, not the sham shows that had kept the same people in power year after year. And for the first time, the ballots weren't just a formality. They were a fight. New faces stepped up to run for office. Young, old, black, Latino, white. People who understood that leadership wasn't about control. It was about service. Accountability. I didn't run for anything. Some people asked me to, begged me to, but I said no. My job wasn't to take power. It was to make sure nobody ever abused it again. Instead, I helped build the Civilian Review Board, a group of regular citizens tasked with overseeing the new sheriff's department. Real oversight. Real transparency. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. There were fights, setbacks, days when it felt like we were crawling through the mud just to move an inch forward. But there were victories too, small ones at first, a fair hiring policy, a reformed complaint system, a new training program focused on de-escalation instead of domination, and bigger ones, an outside auditor brought in to comb through every department budget, every arrest record, every use of force report. Sunlight poured into the dark places, and the dark shriveled under it. Some nights, I still woke up sweating, heart pounding, half expecting to find myself hanging upside down under that twisted oak. The trauma didn't vanish just because we won. The scars didn't fade overnight. But little by little, the nightmares loosened their grip. Little by little, Ashford Springs started breathing again. One evening, about 6 months after Daniels fell, I sat with Miguel on the steps of the new community center, a project we'd scraped together through fundraisers and grants and more volunteer hours than I could count. Kids played tag in the parking lot, their laughter ringing through the cooling air. Someone was grilling hot dogs nearby, the smell drifting over to us. Miguel handed me a paper plate piled high with food and nudged my shoulder with his, "You ever think we'd get here?" he asked. I looked out at the scene, the families, the music, the kids running free without fear. "No," I said honestly, "but I'm glad we did." He nodded, chewing thoughtfully on a bite of potato salad. "You're a stubborn woman, Naomi Ellis," I laughed. The sound startlingly easy, startlingly free. "Yeah," I said, "I guess one am. And thank God for that, because it took every ounce of stubbornness, every scrap of fight, every broken, bleeding piece of me to get us here, and I wouldn't trade a single second of it. Not for anything." Building something new isn't just about hope. It's about endurance. And nobody tells you how much it's going to hurt. They don't tell you that even after the worst villains are gone, the echoes of them stay in the cracks, in the whispered fears, in the moments when progress feels so fragile, it could shatter if you breathe wrong. Ashford Springs was trying. God, we were trying. But the past has a long reach, and it wasn't going to let go without a fight. The first signs came small. Graffiti scrawled on the side of the new community center, "Traitor," in dripping red paint. Anonymous letters slid under doors, late at night, full of threats and venom. Phone calls that hung up as soon as you answered. It was the old sickness, still fighting for a foothold, still hoping it could scare us back into silence. Some people wanted to ignore it. Said it was just a few bad apples. Said we shouldn't give the cowards the attention they craved. But I knew better. We'd seen what ignoring rot could do. We'd lived it, nearly died from it. So we confronted it head on. The community center held a town hall meeting, open to everyone, cameras rolling, no scripted speeches, no hidden agendas, just a room full of scared, angry, exhausted people, trying to figure out how to heal. It wasn't pretty. Old grudges boiled to the surface. Accusations flew. Tears flowed. But you can't clean a wound by pretending it's not infected. You have to dig deep. You have to bleed a little more before you can heal. And that night, Ashford Springs bled. I stood at the front of that crowded room, no podium to hide behind, and told the truth. I told them I still woke up some nights gasping for air, convinced I was hanging from that tree again. I told them I didn't have all the answers, that I wasn't some savior who could wave a magic wand and erase the pain. I told them that change isn't a moment, it's a lifetime. It's choosing every day to do better, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And when I finished, I didn't get applause. I didn't get a standing ovation. I got something better. I got a room full of people, sitting in raw, uncomfortable silence, thinking about what kind of town they wanted to be. After that night, things shifted. Not overnight, not cleanly, but slowly, steadily, the community pulled itself forward. We set up neighborhood committees, real ones, not just rubber stamps for whoever was in charge. We created anonymous hotlines for reporting harassment and threats. We partnered with churches, schools, businesses, anyone willing to stand up and say, "We won't go back." And still, the pushback came. A few old loyalists to Daniels tried to stir up trouble, filed lawsuits, held counter-protests, waving Confederate flags and shouting about heritage and freedom. But they were outnumbered now, drowned out by the sheer force of people who had finally realized their voices mattered. Miguel stayed busy, organizing neighborhood patrols, not to police people, but to protect them. Rachel bounced between Ashford Springs and her next big story, but she never stopped checking in, sending leads, using her platform to keep a spotlight on us when we needed it. And me? I kept showing up. At meetings, at protests, at backyard barbecues where neighbors learned how to trust each other again, over plates of ribs and potato salad. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy, but it was real. Every time a new voter registered, every time a child walked into a newly reformed school with a principal who actually cared, every time someone spoke up when they would have stayed silent before, that was victory. Quiet, unassuming, powerful. Late one night, Miguel and I sat on the hood of his truck, parked on the edge of town where the cornfields started, drinking sodas and watching fireflies blink across the fields like tiny, stubborn stars. "You ever miss it?" he asked suddenly. "Miss what?" "The way it was before," he said. "Before all the fighting, before everything changed." I thought about it. Really thought. There was a certain comfort to ignorance, a certain safety in not knowing how deep the rot went, in pretending the surface was enough. But it was a lie, a prison built of silence and fear. And I'd rather live in a broken, bloody truth than a pretty lie. "No," I said finally, "I don't miss it." He nodded like he understood. Because he did. We all did. Now, and we were better for it. The scars we carried weren't signs of weakness. They were proof we survived. Proof we fought back. Proof we could heal if we chose to. And sitting there, watching the stars flicker and dance above a town that was still messy and complicated and hurting, but trying, really trying, I realized something else. Healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing not to let it define your future. And Ashford Springs was making that choice, one imperfect, courageous day at a time. I thought the worst was behind us. I thought the darkness we'd fought so hard to drag into the light had finally scattered for good. But the thing about shadows? They don't just disappear. They wait. They hide in the cracks, patient, until you let your guard down. And I had, for the first time in months, I believed we were safe. That's why I didn't see it coming. It started with a rumor, whispers floating through town like smoke, a file missing, an arrest record that vanished, evidence that should have buried the last of Daniel's loyalists, suddenly nowhere to be found. At first, I brushed it off. Clerical error, maybe, an accident. God knows Ashford Springs had never been known for its airtight record-keeping. But then, another file disappeared. And another, each one connected to a case Daniels had a vested interest in covering up. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. Someone was sabotaging us from the inside. I brought it up at the next community oversight meeting, a small gathering held in the back room of the new community center, surrounded by folding chairs and old coffee pots that hadn't been cleaned properly in years. Miguel frowned immediately, tapping his pen against the table in that way he did when he smelled trouble. "We need to lock down access," he said. "Nobody touches those files without 2 witnesses present." Heads nodded around the table. Everyone agreed. Except for one, Ben Turner, a young guy, maybe late 20s, who'd stepped up after Daniels fell. Smart, charismatic, spoke all the right words about reform and healing and moving forward. But that night, he didn't say much, just sat there, arms crossed, jaw tight, avoiding my eyes. A knot formed in my stomach. The kind you get when you realize the storm you thought you outran is still right behind you. After the meeting, I pulled Miguel aside. "Keep an eye on Ben," I said quietly. Miguel didn't argue. He just nodded once, because he felt it too. Over the next few days, the cracks widened. Anonymous tips started rolling in, claims that files weren't just missing, but destroyed. That witnesses were being pressured into changing their stories. That someone inside the new administration was quietly rebuilding the old power structure brick by brick. It wasn't Daniels. He was gone, disgraced, barely clinging to relevance in the shadows. No, this was worse. This was someone who understood how we operated now. Someone who knew how to dress corruption up in the language of progress. A wolf, wrapped in the skin of the sheep we'd fought so hard to protect. I dug in, hard, pulled every record, cross-referenced every access log, tracked every irregularity like a bloodhound, and all the trails led back to one place. One person. Ben Turner. It was almost elegant, the way he'd done it. Subtle, patient, moving pieces into place, while the rest of us were still busy patching holes and celebrating small victories. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it, didn't even flinch. He just smiled. A slow, lazy smile that turned my blood cold. "You think you changed anything?" he said. "You tore down a man, not a system. You gave people a new name to worship, a new cause to march for. But fear, Naomi? Fear never leaves. It just changes hands." He wasn't ranting. He wasn't shouting. He was calm, confident, like he genuinely believed he was doing the right thing. "People need order," he said. "They need someone strong enough to make the hard choices. They always have, they always will." I stared at him, feeling something inside me crack wide open. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was a gut-punch reminder that monsters don't always wear sheriff badges and snarl threats in the night. Sometimes they wear suits and talk about unity and healing while they sharpen their knives behind your back. I walked out without another word because there was nothing left to say. The next day, we called an emergency town meeting. Hundreds showed up, cramming into the community center until there was barely room to breathe. Tension buzzed in the air like a live wire. Miguel stood by my side, solid as a rock. Rachel showed up too, recorder in hand, ready to document whatever came next. I stepped onto the makeshift stage, heart hammering against my ribs, and told the truth. Everything, the missing files, the manipulated witnesses, the betrayal. Faces shifted in the crowd. Shock, anger, grief. We'd come so far, fought so hard, and now we were bleeding again, but not like before. This time, the town didn't shrink back. It didn't turn inward, hiding behind fear and shame. It rose. Voices shouted for accountability. Neighbors demanded transparency. People who had never spoken up before stepped forward, sharing what they'd seen, what they knew. The old fear was still there, lingering in the corners, but it didn't own us anymore. And Ben Turner, he didn't stand a chance. Within 48 hours, he was stripped of his position, banned from holding any public office in the county again. Criminal charges were filed. And just like that, another would-be king fell. It wasn't clean, it wasn't painless, but it was real. And as I stood on the courthouse steps once again, watching the sunset bleed gold across a town still scarred but still standing, I realized something important. Victory isn't a moment. It's a choice you make over and over again. Every time you speak, when it's easier to stay silent. Every time you fight, when it's easier to give in. Every time you believe that even the smallest acts of courage can build something that lasts. Ashford Springs wasn't perfect. It never would be, but it was ours now, and we weren't giving it back. After Ben Turner fell, we should have been able to breathe easy. We should have been able to move forward, finally, without looking over our shoulders. But change, real change, never comes without a final test. And ours was waiting for us just around the corner. It started with the election. The first real, fair election Ashford Springs had seen in a generation. People lined up around the block to register. Folks who had never voted before showed up, faces hopeful, shoulders squared. For the first time, we weren't just voting against something, we were voting for something. A future. A real future. But not everyone was ready to let go of the past. 2 weeks before Election Day, the threats started up again. Anonymous flyers tucked into mailboxes at night. Phone calls with no voices on the other end. Graffiti scrawled across campaign signs. Ugly words. Old wounds reopened. It was like the worst parts of Ashford Springs were trying to claw their way back from the grave, and it worked. At least a little. Some people started pulling back, started muttering about whether it was all worth it, whether we were pushing too hard, too fast. Fear is funny that way. It doesn't need a fire, just a spark. And if you're not careful, it'll spread before you even smell the smoke. Miguel and I spent every spare minute knocking on doors, talking to neighbors, reminding them why we started this fight in the first place. We weren't just building a new town, we were proving it could be done, that the world didn't belong to the bullies and the cowards and the liars. It belonged to the ones who refused to give up. Still, the closer we got to Election Day, the heavier the air grew. Like a thunderstorm you could feel in your bones long before the first raindrop falls. And then, just 3 days before the vote, it happened. The community center, the heart of everything we'd built, went up in flames. I got the call from Miguel just after midnight. His voice was hoarse, panicked. "Naomi, it's bad." By the time I got there, half the building was gone. Flames licking the sky, thick black smoke curling into the stars. Firefighters fought like hell, but it was too late. The place we'd poured our sweat, our hopes, our dreams into, reduced to ash in a matter of hours. I stood there in the parking lot, wrapped in a borrowed jacket, the heat from the blaze searing my skin even from 20 feet away, and I felt something crack deep inside me. Not despair, not defeat. Something colder, sharper, rage. They thought they could scare us back into the dark. They thought a match and a can of gasoline could undo everything we'd built. They thought wrong. The next morning, the town woke up to ashes. And something else. Determination. Nobody stayed home. Nobody hid. Nobody gave up. If anything, the fire made people angrier, more resolute, more willing to fight. They showed up to emergency meetings with soot still in their hair. They marched downtown carrying signs that said, "You can't burn down hope." They volunteered space, church basements, empty storefronts, to replace what we'd lost. The fire was supposed to be the end. Instead, it became the beginning of something even stronger. Rachel caught it all on camera. The crowds, the speeches, the moments of raw, unfiltered defiance that no fire could extinguish. By Election Day, the mood had shifted completely. It wasn't fear that filled the air anymore. It was pride. It was stubborn, relentless hope. The turnout shattered every record the town had ever seen. People waited in line for hours, in the sun, in the cold, in the rain. Whole families came together. Grandparents, parents, teenagers voting for the first time. And when the results finally came in, just past midnight, there was no doubt we won. Every seat, every position, every corner of the system that had once been twisted and corrupted and held hostage by fear, taken back by the people it was supposed to serve. Ashford Springs belonged to us again. I stood on the courthouse steps that night, looking out over the sea of faces, Miguel at my side, Rachel somewhere in the crowd, grinning behind her camera. The stars stretched overhead, sharp and clear and endless. And for the first time, in what felt like forever, I let myself believe, not just in the town, not just in the people, but in the future, a real one. Built from the ashes, brick by brick, hand in hand, It wasn't perfect. It never would be. No place is. But it was ours. Every scar, every setback, every stubborn, beautiful inch of it. And we weren't going to let anyone take it away again. Not now. Not ever. Victory is a funny thing. It's loud and quiet all at once. It shouts in the streets and whispers in the quiet moments when you realize you can finally exhale. After the election, Ashford Springs could have collapsed from exhaustion. Nobody would have blamed us. We had fought so hard, lost so much, carried so many scars, but this town had learned something about itself through all the pain, something bigger than any one election, any one sheriff, any one building. We'd learned that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering and building anyway. That's why, a few months later, we gathered at the edge of town, on the empty lot where the community center used to stand before the fire took it. This time, we weren't there to mourn. We were there to build, not just walls and a roof, not just a building with a new paint job, but a real, living symbol of who we had become. The idea started small, like all the best ones do. Miguel brought it up one night over coffee at the diner. "We should rebuild it," he said simply. "Bigger, better, something that says we're not afraid anymore." I looked around the table. Faces nodded. Eyes lit up. Hope flickering back to life, like embers, catching on a fresh breeze. We put the word out, started planning. This wasn't going to be some outside contractor swooping in. This was going to be ours. Brick by brick, board by board, raised by the very hands that had once been told they didn't matter. Donations rolled in. Small bills crumpled into collection jars. Bigger checks mailed from neighboring towns that had watched our fight and wanted to help. People volunteered their time, their skills, their sweat. Carpenters, electricians, retired teachers, teenagers on summer break. Everyone had a piece of the new center's foundation under their fingernails. Everyone had a stake in it. I spent days hauling wood, painting trim, sorting supplies. It didn't matter that my ribs still ached if I twisted too fast. It didn't matter that every night I came home so tired I could barely climb the stairs. It mattered that when I looked around, I saw a town refusing to go backward. The new building rose slow but steady. Bright, clean walls, wide open rooms, filled with light. A space meant for meetings, for learning, for community, but it needed something else. Something to tie it all together. A symbol. It was one of the kids, a wiry 14-year-old named Jalen, who came up with the idea. "We should have a tree," he said one afternoon, sweat dripping from his brow as he hammered nails like a pro. "A new one to replace." You know, he didn't have to say it. We all knew. The tree they'd tried to hang me from still stood, gnarled and twisted at the edge of the woods, a rotting monument to everything we were leaving behind. We needed something new, something living. So we found one, a sturdy young oak, roots deep and strong, branches stretching wide toward the sky. We planted it right out front, under an archway that read, "Hope grows here." The dedication ceremony was set for a Saturday afternoon in early spring, when the air still carried a bite, but the promise of warmth hung just around the corner. The whole town showed up. I mean it, the whole town. Old-timers who remembered when Ashford Springs was nothing but dirt roads and handshake deals. Young kids who would grow up never knowing the fear that used to hang over this place like a permanent cloud. Families, teachers, doctors, farmers, people who had once crossed the street to avoid each other now stood shoulder to shoulder, laughing, talking, sharing plates of barbecue and sweet tea. The new mayor, a woman named Evelyn Ramirez, sharp as a tack and tougher than boot leather, gave a speech about resilience and community. Miguel spoke too, voice cracking a little when he talked about all we'd survived. Rachel was there, standing quietly in the back with her camera, recording it all, tears shining in her eyes. And then it was my turn. I didn't have anything prepared. I didn't need to. I stepped up to the microphone, looked out over that sea of faces, and spoke from the only place that ever mattered, straight from the heart. I'm not going to pretend it was easy, I said. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that fighting for this town didn't cost us something. It did. I paused, letting the weight of that truth settle. We lost friends. We lost trust. We lost the illusion that things were fine just because they were quiet. But we found something too, I continued. We found out what we're made of. We found out that our voices matter. We found out that even when they try to silence you, even when they hang you out to dry, even when they tell you you're alone, you're not. I looked back at the tree, sunlight filtering through its fresh green leaves. This tree, I said, isn't just a tree. It's a promise. That we won't forget. That we won't go back. That we'll keep building, keep fighting, keep standing for each other, no matter how hard it gets. I don't know who started it. Maybe Jalen. Maybe Miguel. Maybe it was just something waiting to happen. But the clapping started, slow at first, then louder, rising into a roar that filled the square, bouncing off the new walls we built with our own hands. And I stood there, tears burning hot and fierce behind my eyes, and let it wash over me. Not because I needed the applause, not because I wanted to be some hero, but because it wasn't about me anymore. It never had been. It was about us, all of us. Ashford Springs wasn't perfect. It never would be. No place is, but it was alive. And it was ours. That night, under a sky thick with stars, we danced in the streets. We lit bonfires. We sang old songs and new ones. We grieved what we lost. We celebrated what we gained. And we planted our hopes deep into the soil of a town that refused to die. Hope grows here, and it always will. Funny thing about surviving, it doesn't feel the way you expect. It's not a grand celebration. It's not a triumphant parade. It's quiet. It's sitting alone on a front porch long after the sun has set, breathing in the cool night air and realizing you're still here. You made it, despite everything. You're still standing. Ashford Springs survived too. It didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a switch we flipped one day. It was slow, stubborn work, day after day, choice after choice. 1,000 tiny acts of hope stitched together to make something bigger than all of us. The first time I realized the town had changed was small. I was sitting in the diner, sipping terrible coffee, when a woman I didn't know slid into the booth across from me. She didn't say hello. She didn't introduce herself. She just looked me in the eye and said, "Thank you." That was it. No speech, no explanation, just 2 words that held everything. I nodded. Because sometimes that's all you can do. Because sometimes survival doesn't leave you with enough words for everything you feel. The community center became more than just a building. It became a home for every orphaned hope this town had tried to bury for generations. We held town halls there, packed shoulder to shoulder with people who had never believed their voices mattered before. We hosted classes, know your rights workshops, voter education seminars, small business trainings. Kids played in the fields behind the center, their laughter ringing through the air like a song we'd almost forgotten how to sing. It wasn't just a building, it became a living, breathing testament to the spirit of the town, a place where past wounds could begin to heal. The oak tree out front grew strong and tall, its branches reaching out wide like arms ready to catch whatever the future threw at us. Every spring, its leaves would return brighter, greener, more determined. I used to sit under its shade and wonder how something so fragile could endure so much. Maybe that's what made it strong. Maybe that's what made all of us strong, too. Miguel started a mentorship program, working with teenagers who the old system would have thrown away without a second thought. He taught them carpentry, auto repair, leadership skills. taught them that their futures didn't have to be written by someone else's fear, taught them that survival could be more than just getting by. It could be thriving. On Saturdays, I would hear the echo of hammers, the low rumble of laughter as they built things together, benches, sheds, even playgrounds. Each swing set they raised was a middle finger to the past that tried to tell them they didn't matter. Rachel kept coming back too, camera slung over her shoulder, capturing the slow miracle of a town piecing itself back together one story at a time. She told those stories to the world, stories of stubborn resilience, quiet revolutions, the kind of everyday bravery that doesn't make headlines, but changes lives all the same. I remember watching one of her new documentaries, projected onto the side of the old grocery store one summer night. Families sat on lawn chairs, kids sprawled on blankets, everyone looking up at our story, flickering across cracked brick and peeling paint, like light finding its way through the broken places. And me? I stayed. Of course, I stayed. I planted roots deep into the same soil they once tried to bury me in. I bought a little house on the edge of town, fixed it up with my own 2 hands, filled the garden with wildflowers and vegetables, and hope. I painted the porch swing bright yellow, even though the neighbors thought it was too loud. I wanted it loud. I wanted it impossible to ignore. Some mornings I woke up before dawn just to sit on the porch and watch the mist roll over the fields, just to remind myself I am still here. We are still here. We didn't erase the past. We didn't pretend the scars weren't there. We built something beautiful on top of them anyway, because that's what survival really is. It's not forgetting, it's choosing to build anyway. There were still hard days. Of course, there were still whispers in dark corners, still old fears clawing at the edges of progress. But they didn't own us anymore. They didn't define us. Ashford Springs wasn't perfect, but it was alive, and it was ours. 1 year after the protests ended, after Daniels was forced out, after we planted that stubborn little oak tree, the town threw a celebration. Not a victory parade. We knew better than that. A gathering, a remembrance, a promise to ourselves and to each other. People brought food, barbecue, casseroles, pies stacked high. Kids ran wild in the fields. Someone set up a small stage, and local musicians played songs old and new, and when the sun started to set, painting the sky in deep purples and golds, we gathered under the oak tree. Miguel stood up first. He didn't give a speech. He didn't need to. He just looked around at all of us, his voice steady and sure, and said, "We are not who they said we were. We are who we choose to be." Then Rachel spoke, sharing snippets of the stories she had captured, moments of kindness, of bravery, of simple, stubborn hope. And then they asked me to speak. I wasn't ready. I didn't have anything prepared, but sometimes the truth doesn't need preparation. Sometimes it just needs a voice. I stepped onto the little makeshift stage, heart hammering in my chest, and looked out over the crowd. Faces I knew, faces I loved, faces that had fought and bled and hoped right alongside me. And I said, "We're still here. That's it." That's all I said at first. Because sometimes survival is its own kind of victory. Sometimes just being here, just standing, just breathing, that's enough. But then I kept going. I told them about the nights I wanted to give up, about the days when fear felt like a second skin I couldn't peel off, about the moments when it would have been easier to run, and I told them why I stayed, because Ashford Springs is more than its history, because survival is more than endurance. It's a choice to believe that something better is possible, because hope isn't soft, hope isn't fragile, hope is a battle cry. Hope grows here, not because it's easy, not because it's safe, but because we choose it every single day. We choose to plant roots even when the ground feels unsteady. We choose to build, even when the wreckage feels overwhelming. We choose to love, even when fear whispers that we shouldn't. Hope grows here. And if it can grow in Ashford Springs, battered and bruised and stubborn as hell, it can grow anywhere. It can grow in you. It can grow wherever you choose to fight for it. When I finished speaking, the crowd didn't erupt into cheers. There was no roaring applause, just a long, deep silence. The kind of silence that says, "We heard you. We feel it too. We're still here." And that was enough. That night, as the stars blinked into existence overhead, we lit candles under the oak tree, hundreds of tiny flames flickering against the dark, each one a promise, each one a defiant act of hope. We sang old songs. We told stories. We remembered. We dreamed. And when the candles finally burned low, when the last notes faded into the night, we didn't say goodbye. We just said, "See you tomorrow," because survival isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning. Hope grows here, and it always will. Sometimes life will try to break you. It will hang you out in the darkness, leave you swinging with nothing but your own heartbeat, to remind you that you're still alive. But what matters isn't the pain you suffer, it's what you choose to do after. Naomi's story is a reminder that no matter how deep the roots of injustice run, they are never stronger than the people who stand up to tear them out. It's a story about courage, about resilience, about the power of a community that finally says, enough. And most of all, it's about how real change doesn't come from shouting the loudest, it comes from holding on the longest, in a world that sometimes feels too heavy, too divided, too broken to fix. Stories like this remind us we have the power to heal, we have the power to rebuild, and no matter how long it takes, no matter how much it costs, the fight for justice is always worth it. If this story moved you, if it stirred something deep inside, take a second to like this video. Share it with someone who still believes in standing up for what's right. And subscribe for more stories that prove hope is never wasted. And, hey, if you're listening right now, remember, it's never too late to be part of the change. It's never too late to choose courage over fear. And it's never too late to believe that a better world is possible. Thank you for being here. And thank you for never giving up.